Agatha Christie, Herb of Death. Well, Mrs. Bantry, said Sir Henry Clithering, as Mrs. Bantry tossed a seed catalogue onto the table. I simply marvel at how you do it, she said. She said, they thought. You wondered, everyone decided. But I simply haven't the knack. Besides, I haven't even the slightest idea what to tell you about. Now, that we shall never believe, Dr. Lloyd remarked, shaking his gray head with a smile. Indeed, my dear, that is quite true, old Miss Marple added gently. You cannot imagine how dull my life is, Mrs. Bantry replied. Servants, trips to town for dresses, the dentist, Ascot, which Arthur detests, and, of course, the garden. The garden, cried Dr. Lloyd. There is your weakness, as everyone knows. How lovely it must be to have a garden, the young actress Jane Helier remarked. If, of course, one doesn't have to dig in the dirt and spoil one's hands. I do adore flowers. The garden, Sir Henry repeated. Perhaps we might take that as our starting point. Come now, Mrs. Bantry. Poisoned bulbs, deadly yellow daffodils, death in the grass. Be-ra-rar. It is strange you should mention that, said Mrs. Bantry. I have just remembered a particular case. Arthur, you haven't forgotten the tragedy at Clodderham Court and Sir Ambrose Bursey, have you? No, certainly not, her husband replied, looking somewhat flustered. A strange business. Tell them, Dolly. Well, there is actually very little to tell, the hostess began. It was the mention of dead grass that brought it back to me, though I think the story might better be called Sage and Onions. Sage and onions? Dr. Lloyd repeated. Yes, this is how it happened, said Mrs. Bantry. Arthur and I were staying with Sir Ambrose Bursey at Clodderham Court. One day, by some stupid mistake, a great deal of foxglove was picked along with the sage. The greens were chopped with onions and used as stuffing for the ducks served at dinner. Everyone was taken ill, some quite seriously, and one poor girl, a ward of Sir Ambrose, actually died. How dreadful, whispered Miss Marple. And what happened next? Asked Sir Henry Clithering. Nothing happened next. That was all, the hostess replied. My dear lady, Sir Henry protested. That cannot be all. You have told us of a tragic accident, but hardly a mystery. Perhaps I have left something out, Mrs. Bantry admitted, but only because I am such a poor storyteller. And yet you have masterfully piqued our curiosity, cried Sir Henry. I am certain there is more to it. I suppose we must ask questions now? Miss Marple, perhaps you would like to begin. I am interested in the cook, said Miss Marple. Either she was incredibly stupid or quite inexperienced. Mostly just stupid, Mrs. Bantry answered. She cried for ages afterward, but the herbs had been brought to her, and she was told they were sage. So it wasn't really her fault. Your turn, Miss Helier, said Sir Henry. What? Oh, you wanted to ask a question? But I haven't the foggiest idea what to ask. Why not inquire about the characters in this drama? Sir Henry suggested. Oh, of course, the actress exclaimed. The hostess began to count on her fingers. Well, first there was Sir Ambrose. Then Sylvia Keene, the girl who died. Then there was her friend, Maud Y., one of those plain brunettes who somehow attract men's attention. I've never known how they do it. Also, a Mr. Corll was there, visiting Sir Ambrose to discuss rare books. You know the sort, ancient Latin volumes on moldy parchment. Then there was Jerry Lorimer, Sir Ambrose's nearest neighbor. And finally, Mrs. Carpenter, a quiet older woman of the sort who can sit down and fall asleep anywhere, provided they aren't disturbed. I suspect she was hired as a paid companion for Sylvia. That was the whole party. I believe it is my turn now, said Sir Henry. I should like a description of the characters. Mrs. Bantry, pray start with Sir Ambrose. Oh, he was a most distinguished old gentleman. Though old is hardly the word. He was only a little over 60, as far as I can judge. However, he was in very poor health. He had a weak heart. He couldn't even manage the stairs, so they had a lift installed. He looked much older than his years, had exquisite manners, never showed irritation, and hid his sorrows. He had beautiful silver-white hair, and his voice was quite mesmerizing. "Excellent," said Sir Henry. "I can see him. Now, Sylvia." Sylvia Keene was very beautiful, a blonde with lovely skin. Perhaps not very clever, rather dull, in fact. "Really, Dolly," her husband protested. "Arthur, of course, thinks otherwise," Mrs. Bantry said dryly. But she really was quite stupid. She never said a single thing worth hearing. She was one of the most graceful creatures I have ever met, Colonel Bantry said warmly. The way she played tennis, her laugh, her manners. I'd wager the young men were quite mad about her. "That is where you are wrong," cried Mrs. Bantry. "Only old flirts like you sit around dreaming about young girls." "I see." Sir Henry interrupted the banter. "Very well. You've already described the companion. A quiet old thing, if I recall correctly. Yes, a rather stout, fair-skinned woman in her early 40s. Sickeningly polite, too. Adelaide Carpenter had lived there since Sylvia was 11. One of those widows whose husbands leave them a heap of aristocratic relatives instead of cash. I didn't care for her. I never did like people with long, white hands. And Mr. Corll? A stooping old man, the sort you see everywhere. He was always nodding off and only came to life when talking about his precious moldy books. I don't think he and Sir Ambrose knew each other very well. And the neighbor, Jerry? Oh, he was a truly charming boy. The saddest part was that he was engaged to Sylvia. How interesting. Miss Marple began, then stopped herself. "What is interesting?" asked Mrs. Bantry. "Oh, nothing, my dear." Sir Henry shot the elderly lady a curious look and said thoughtfully, "So, the young people were engaged. For how long?" "About a year." Sir Ambrose had objected at first because Sylvia was so young, but the engagement took place anyway. A year later, the old man gave in, and the wedding was to be very soon. "Uh-huh. Did the young lady have any property of her own?" "Hardly anything. 100 or 2 a year." "You're looking in the wrong place. Clodderham." Colonel Bantry laughed. "It is the doctor's turn to ask a question," said Sir Henry. "I shall wait." "My curiosity is mainly professional," said Dr. Lloyd. "I should like to know the medical verdict at the inquest. If, of course, our hostess remembers." "Only in general terms," Mrs. Bantry replied. "Digitalin poisoning, isn't that what it's called?" "Yes, digitalis or digitalin, the active ingredient of foxglove. It acts directly on the heart muscle. In certain cardiac conditions, digitalis is used as a powerful medicine. A most curious case. I find it hard to believe that cooked foxglove leaves could cause death when ingested. Our ideas about the effects of poisonous herbs and berries are often exaggerated. Very few people realize that the active substance, the alkaloid, must be carefully extracted in its pure form. The day before yesterday, my friend Mrs. MacArthur sent Mr. Toomey some rare seeds, Miss Marple said. The cook mistook them for onions and served them at the table. Everyone in Mr. Toomey's household was quite ill, but none of them died, Dr. Lloyd interjected. No, no one, Miss Marple admitted. A young woman I knew once died of ptomaine poisoning, Jane Hellier remarked. Let us not be distracted, Sir Henry suggested. We are here to investigate a crime. A crime? Jane asked in astonishment. I thought we were talking about an accident. If it were merely an accident, Mrs. Bantry would hardly be telling us about it, Clodderham countered. By the rules of the game, we're to speak only of criminal acts. As I understand it, the girl's death only seems like an accident at first glance. In reality, something far more sinister lies beneath. It reminds me of a case from my own practice. A group of guests was chatting after dinner. Suddenly, one of them snatched a horse pistol from a wall decorated with antique weapons and, as a joke, pointed it at another guest. The ancient pistol turned out to be loaded and went off, killing the victim instantly. We had to discover who had secretly cleaned and loaded the weapon, and who had steered the conversation toward that fatal moment. After all, the man who pulled the trigger was entirely innocent. Now, I believe we are facing a very similar picture. The foxglove leaves were intentionally mixed with the sage, and whoever did so knew exactly what the result would be. If we exclude the cook, and she can be excluded, the question naturally arises, who gathered the herbs in the garden and brought them to the kitchen? Well, that is a simple question, said Mrs. Bantry. At least the second part of it. Sylvia herself brought the herbs to the kitchen. Gathering salad and various herbs was part of her daily household duties. She and Mrs. Carpenter always did it themselves, never trusting the gardener, who was forever trying to palm off overripe vegetables on them. The foxglove grew right among the sage in one corner of the garden, so the mistake was considered quite understandable. And who gathered the herbs that day? Was it Sylvia again? No one knew for certain, but it was assumed to be her. Assumptions are dangerous things, Sir Henry remarked. One thing I know for a fact. Mrs. Carpenter gathered nothing that day, the hostess replied. She spent the entire morning on the terrace with me. The weather was unusually warm for early spring. Sylvia went down to the garden alone, but later I saw her returning arm in arm with Maud Y. Were they close friends? Miss Marple asked. Yes. Mrs. Bantry started to say more, but caught herself in time and fell silent. How long had Maud been a guest in the house? About 2 weeks, I believe. You didn't quite like her, did you? Sir Henry inquired. No, why should you say that? I like her very much, the hostess said in a guarded tone. You are hiding something, Mrs. Bantry, Sir Henry said reproachfully. You mentioned that the young couple were engaged, which makes the tragedy seem even more terrible. Miss Marple spoke up. And yet, there was no conviction in your voice when you said those words. You notice everything. Miss Marple, cried Mrs. Bantry. Yes, you are right. I don't know if I should say it, but you must, Sir Henry said firmly. Those are the rules of the game. Very well. On the evening before the tragedy, I stepped out onto the terrace. The drawing-room window was open, and I accidentally saw Jerry Lorimer and Maud Y. They were kissing. Of course, I don't know how serious it was. One can't always tell a flirtation from a romance at a glance. But Sir Ambrose disliked Jerry and perhaps knew what kind of man he was. Of one thing I am certain, Maud Y adored him. You should have seen the way she looked at him when she forgot herself. I believe Maud and Jerry would have been a much better match than Jerry and Sylvia. And did Lorimer marry this Maud Y in the end? Sir Henry asked. Yes, as a matter of fact, he did. 6 months after the tragedy. Just think of that. And you claim you have nothing to tell. How skillfully you handled the matter. First tossing us a bare bone, and now it turns out the bone is buried under a thick layer of flesh. Please, don't use such gruesome words, Mrs. Bantry pleaded. That is how vegetarians always talk about meat, and in such a tone that it makes one think twice before eating a small steak. Speaking of which, Mr. Coral was a staunch vegetarian. Those stooped, white-bearded old men are a terribly eccentric lot. Now I see the characters of this drama, as if they were before my eyes, said Sir Henry. And they all seem quite interesting people. Don't you agree, Miss Marple? Human nature is always interesting, Sir Henry. It is curious how people of a certain type behave almost identically when placed in similar circumstances. A man and two women, Sir Henry muttered. The eternal human triangle. Is our puzzle today based on that? I believe it is. Dr. Lloyd cleared his throat. Mrs. Bantry, he asked, you also felt unwell, did you not? Indeed I did. Both Arthur and I, and everyone else. That is precisely the point. Everyone, said the doctor. Do you see what I mean? The person who planned and executed this acted very strangely. Either they had blind faith in chance, or they held the lives of their fellow men in no regard at all. It is hard to believe in a villain capable of deliberately poisoning 8 people just to eliminate one. I see your point, Sir Henry said thoughtfully. I must admit, that thought had not occurred to me. And they might have poisoned themselves, too, Jane noted. Was anyone absent during dinner? Miss Marple asked. Everyone was present, except Mr. Lorimer, perhaps. He didn't live in the house, did he, my dear? No, he didn't live there, but he dined with us all that evening. Well, that changes everything, Miss Marple exclaimed, frowning as she fell into deep thought. What a fool I am, she finally whispered. A total fool. You've made me wonder, Lloyd, said Sir Henry. How could someone calculate it so that only the girl received a fatal dose? They couldn't, the doctor replied. That is why I suspect Sylvia was not the intended victim at all. What? The result of food poisoning cannot be predetermined. Several people share the meal. 1 or 2 feel a slight malaise. 2 more become seriously ill, and 1 dies. But you can never be certain it will happen exactly that way. Other factors often play a part. Digitalis is a poison that acts directly on the heart. As I said, it is sometimes prescribed as medicine. Now, there was only one person in that house who suffered from a heart ailment. Suppose the criminal chose him as the victim. A dose that the others could withstand would be fatal for him. At any rate, the killer would have had every reason to think so. However, the outcome was entirely different, which only confirms my opinion on the unpredictability of poison and its unreliability as a murder weapon. You believe the killer was aiming at Sir Ambrose, and the girl died because of a miscalculation? Sir Henry asked, who was to inherit the old man's money after his death? Jane Hellier inquired. An excellent question, cried Sir Henry. When I was with the police, that was the first thing we always asked. Sir Ambrose had a son, Mrs. Bantry answered, a young man of a wild and reckless nature. He had quarreled with his father years ago, but Sir Ambrose could not disinherit him. Clodderham Court was entailed by law. Martin Bercy was to receive the estate and the title. However, Sir Ambrose had other significant property which he could leave as he pleased. This part of the inheritance was bequeathed to Sylvia. After her death, he never bothered to rewrite his will, and he died himself a year later. Likely, the money went to the crown or to his son as the next of kin. I couldn't say for sure. So, the master's death was profitable only to his son and to the victim herself, Sir Henry mused. A rather bleak prospect for a detective. And did the other woman receive nothing? Jane asked. Mrs. Carpenter was not mentioned in the will. Miss Marple, you aren't listening to us at all, Sir Henry noted. What are you thinking about? If it isn't a secret. About old Mr. Badger, the chemist, Miss Marple replied. He had a young housekeeper who was more suited to be his granddaughter than his daughter. And yet, after his death, it was discovered that for 2 years she had been in a carefully concealed but perfectly legal marriage with Mr. Badger. Of course, the deceased was merely a pharmacist and a rough commoner, while Sir Ambrose was a refined gentleman of society. But human nature is very much a matter of patterns. And this Mrs. Carpenter, Jane Hellier, broke the silence. Was she good-looking? Yes, but hers was a beauty that did not immediately catch the eye. She had a very soft voice, Arthur Bantry added. A purring voice, his wife corrected him. Well, how did you like my puzzle? Shall we move on to our theories? You begin, Sir Henry. I fear I shall be long-winded, Clodderham said. The fact is, I have no settled opinion. For instance, Sir Ambrose. It is unlikely he chose such an extraordinary method of suicide. On the other hand, the death of his ward promised him no benefit. I think we can leave Sir Ambrose in peace. Then Mr. Coral. He had no motive to kill the girl. If the intended victim was Sir Ambrose, perhaps Mr. Coral had stolen some ancient manuscripts that no one but the old man would ever miss. It's a thin theory and rather implausible. It seems Mr. Coral is also out. Now, Miss Y. She had no reason to wish Sir Ambrose dead, but very strong motives for killing Sylvia. Maud wanted her suitor, and judging by Mrs. Bantry's words, that desire was very powerful. Furthermore, Maud went into the garden with Sylvia and thus had the opportunity to pick the necessary herb. Yes, Miss Y must be kept in mind. Then, young Lorimer. He was the one who should have dreamed of both the old man and Sylvia dying. By getting rid of his fiancée, he could marry her friend. Though killing Sylvia was unnecessary. What is a broken engagement these days? A mere trifle. But in the event of Sir Ambrose's death, Jerry gained the chance to marry a wealthy girl instead of a poor one. How important that depends on the young man's finances. If it turns out his estate was mortgaged to the hilt and Mrs. Bantry withheld that fact, I shall charge her with breaking the rules. That leaves Mrs. Carpenter. I suspect her. Those white hands and that perfect alias. I don't quite believe in alibis. But if I must point a finger, it would be at Maud Y. There is more evidence against her than anyone else. Who is next? Asked Mrs. Bantry. You, Dr. Lloyd? I think Clodderham is mistaken in believing someone wanted to kill the girl, said the physician. I am convinced the culprit was trying to do away with Sir Ambrose. I doubt young Lorimer possessed the necessary knowledge for such a deed. I lean toward the idea that the culprit was Mrs. Carpenter. She had lived with the family a long time, was aware of the master's health, and could easily have arranged things so the girl picked the wrong herb. You said yourself that Sylvia was rather dull. I must admit, I see no motive, but I'll venture a guess that years before, Sir Ambrose made a will in which Mrs. Carpenter was mentioned. That is all. I can think of nothing better. Mrs. Bantry turned her gaze toward Jane Hellier. I hardly know what to say, she began. Why not assume the criminal was Sylvia herself? After all, she was the one who took the greens to the kitchen. You said Sir Ambrose was against her marriage. By killing him, she would get the money and the chance to marry Lorimer, and she knew as much about her guardian's health as Mrs. Carpenter. There you have it. And what do you think, Miss Marple? The hostess asked. I think Sir Henry has laid everything out beautifully, the old lady replied. And Dr. Lloyd was right as well, though the doctor did not quite correctly value one aspect of what he said. Not being Sir Ambrose's attending physician, he naturally could not know exactly what kind of heart disease the man suffered from. I don't quite understand what you mean, Dr. Lloyd remarked. You suggested that with the ailments Sir Ambrose suffered from, digitalis might have had a lethal effect on him. We have no proof that the nature of the illness was such. It could have been quite the opposite. You said yourself that in many cases, digitalis is prescribed as a remedy. Even so, I still don't see what you're driving at the fact that Sir Ambrose might well have had pure digitalin in his possession. Imagine you want to poison someone with it. The easiest way is to give a little of the substance to everyone and a bit more to the victim. No one would ever dream a murder had been committed. It is quite likely that, in addition to the foxglove leaves, Sylvia took digitalin in its pure form. It would have been nothing for Sir Ambrose to slip the poison into her cocktail, or even persuade the girl to drink a little as a tonic. Are you suggesting Sir Ambrose poisoned his own ward? A charming girl he loved dearly? Precisely, Miss Marple answered. Remember Mr. Badger and his young housekeeper. Do not think a 60-year-old man is incapable of falling in love with a girl of 20. It happens all the time. And in the case of an autocrat like Sir Ambrose, passion took a twisted form, turning into obsession. The very thought of Sylvia's marriage filled him with dread. He resisted with all his might and failed. His mad jealousy grew to such an extent that Sir Ambrose preferred to kill the girl rather than let her go to young Lorimer. The plan was long in the making. Sir Ambrose planted foxglove seeds in the sage beds, and it takes time for the plants to grow. On that day, he gathered the herbs himself and handed the basket to Sylvia, so she would be the one to carry it to the kitchen. I think we should view his terrible deed with a measure of mercy. Old men behave in the most incomprehensible ways when it comes to young girls. Mrs. Bantry, did it really happen as Miss Marple says? Sir Henry asked. Yes, the hostess nodded. I sincerely believe the death was an accident, but after Sir Ambrose passed away, I was sent a letter in which he revealed the truth. We were good friends, and so he chose me. Do not think I betrayed his confidence. I have changed all the names and invented the setting. Even Arthur didn't understand at first, and only later joined the game. So, as they say in detective novels, all the characters in this drama are fictional. You will never know their real names. A game is a game.